Hi everyone. I just wanted to check in after looking at our case study VoiceThread. Really good discussion this week. I think everyone seems to be more clear on what case study is and it isn't. The need to have a case of something that has clear boundaries, and something where the phenomenon of interest is happening. We're going to be really interested in that phenomenon, but also in the context in which it's occurring. So, examples from some of my work: school and community partnerships are deeply contextual within the community in which they're happening. Things like which organizations are active in the community, where is the political power, where is the funding, who are the different players, what are their previous relationships. All of those things matter, and they're all really contextual to different communities. Or our policy implementation study, they happen in individual schools that have different organizational needs and configurations. I think we got a handle this week that case study requires multiple data sources, including triangulating our key informants, and others who can provide their perspectives, as well as triangulation from different sources such as documents or observations. It's one thing to hear an administrator say that they do something. It's another to hear that same thing from a teacher. That really gives us that sort of agreement across members of an organization. Or for a teacher to say, I do XYZ in the classroom. If you walk in and see it, then you know you're onto something. I think particularly in education, we do a really good job of training teachers and administrators to know what the right thing is to say, but it's a lot harder to put a lot of those things into practice. So case study can kind of help us see the whole picture. I think of case studies sort of as a puzzle. No one individual is likely to have the clear picture of the whole puzzle. So you're going to have to go and collect the different pieces from each person to put them together to tell a story. It is particularly useful for how questions about process, or why questions, why things happened a certain way. Yin is a little bit defensive about case studies. So there are sort of three big sort of names in case study: Robert Yin, Robert Stake, and Miriam, who also has a great text on case study. Yin is probably the most structured, and so in some ways a really easy place to start. It's much more accessible, but he does come from sort of a positivist, post-positivist background that I think leads him to be a little bit more defensive. So I would disagree with the assessment that case study is denigrated. I think Yin is just being overly defensive in trying to push case study on a positivist and post-positivist audience. I think there are still some questions about generalizability. For the most part, we're really focused on those individual cases, and we're, not really looking to generalize in that traditional sense. What we find in particular cases, in particular schools, in particular universities, may not be transferable to other cases. That said, one of the things we really want to do in case study is be really careful in our descriptive of the case. What is it a case of? Is it a public university? Is it an R1? Is it D3? What are the different characteristics of our case? Because that's going to help readers decide themselves whether any of the findings might be transferable to their own case. So having that really thick, rich description of the case itself is really important. And you'll see that in a lot of case studies, there'll just be a section on the case itself. However, case study is also appropriate for us to generate theory that can then be applied to other cases. So that's that sort of theoretical generalizability. I think case study is a particularly good way of doing that because it allows triangulation both within cases and then across cases. For me, it feels like a way to get at the nugget or kernel of the truth of a phenomenon that's happening across settings. So like the Trust in Communications article, whether our schools were in rural, suburban, or urban communities, their leaders prioritize creating these reciprocal communications and trust across levels in the organizations in ways that we didn't see at the typically performing schools. And some of our typically performing schools, things leaders did undermined trust. They weren't bad schools, but they just didn't have that focus on developing trust. But sometimes you find that context really does make a difference. So in our analysis, we really kind of came to the conclusion that the rural schools in our study, their leaders acted in fundamentally different ways in some areas. They tended to take a more resistive stance to Common Core implementation and mandates from the state. They really dug into what worked for them and what didn't, and threw out the rest. One of the superintendents would say things like, I follow the letter of the law, but I'm going to do, what I need to do that is right for my school. So good discussion this week. I am looking forward to getting into critical approaches. I will be at UCA at the end of this week. So again, a little more limited access to email. You'll also see you have Thanksgiving week off, and we'll pick up on the 26th with the next VoiceThread discussion. So if you want to use this week to kind of get ahead so you don't have anything hanging over your head on the long weekend, I think that would be an excellent plan. It's something I'm certainly going to be trying to do myself. So looking forward to our discussion.